Hi everybody and welcome back to my videos, whether you are watching on YouTube or on Rumble, whichever one you happen to be watching this on. Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about slavery, or whether or not white people owe black people reparations. Okay? So, I asked Grok to give me the historical facts and to give me a script for this podcast or type video, a podcast style script with all the facts. Okay? So, let's get into this. Okay? Let's get into this topic. Okay? You've probably seen the slogans, whites owe reparations for blacks, to blacks for slavery. It's simple, direct, and powerful. But history is really simple. Today, we're going to walk through the actual historical record, who was involved, what happened after that's a big word, emancipation, after the slaves were free. Well, that's a big word. What efforts were made and where things stand. No spin, no guilt tripping, no denialism, just the facts. Let's start with the big picture on the transatlantic slave trade between the 16th and 19th centuries. Roughly 10.7 to 12.5 million Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas. The United States received only a small fraction of that. Historians estimate between 388,000 and 450,000 people arrived directly on ships to what became the U.S. The vast majority of the trade went to Brazil, the Caribbean, and Spanish colonies. Once here, the enslaved population grew through births, reaching about 4 million by 1860, concentrated in the South. Importantly, this was not a one-sided European operation. African kingdoms, merchants, and warlords captured people, often from rival ethnic groups, through warfare, raids, or punishment, and sold them at coastal forts to European buyers. Europeans rarely ventured deep inland to kidnap people themselves. In the early centuries, slavery and slave trade existed in Africa long before Europeans arrived. The transatlantic demand supercharged it. Most European players included the Portuguese, British, French, Dutch, and Spanish. Okay, hold on a second. I think I misread that. The transatlantic charge demanded. Major European players included the Portuguese, British, French, Dutch, and Spanish. Slavery in America ended with the Civil War and the 13th Amendment in 1865, which abolished it nationwide. The war itself was devastating, over 600,000 dead. Mostly white soldiers fighting on both sides, with profound economic cost to the entire nations. Right after the war, were genuine attempts to help the newly freed. Okay, let me read that again. Right after the war, there were genuine attempts to help the newly freed. The most famous was General William Tecumseh Sherman Special Order Number 15 in 1865. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce some of these people's names. And apparently William has a very interesting middle name. I don't know, okay? So anyways, it set aside confiscated Confederate land along with the Georgia and South Carolina coast for free black families. Famously remembered as 40 acres and a mule. Around 40,000 black Americans briefly settled on this land. But President Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, reversed it. The land was returned to former Confederate owners. This remains one of the biggest what-ifs in the reparations debate. Another lesser-known fact, in Washington, D.C., the federal government passed the Compensated Emancipation Act. I'm pretty sure I butchered that word again. In 1862. Because I'm reading from a script that I asked Grok to generate with facts, okay? About this, I'm going to post the meme in the beginning of the video. And you'll see that I'm using it to give me the facts and all that, okay? So yeah, Grok is giving me scripts. I asked Grok to give me like a podcast style script, okay? With facts about this topic, okay? Slave owners in the district were paid up to $300 per enslaved person freed. That's right, the government compensated the owners, not the formerly enslaved. The broader Reconstruction efforts included the Freedman's Bureau, I think that's how you pronounce that word, which helped with education, contracts, and some land distribution, and the Southern Homestead of 1866, designed to help freed people and poor whites get land. These programs faced massive underfunding, corruptions, violence from groups like the KKK. The script has their name, their full name. I'm going by their initials. And political backlash. By the end of Reconstruction in 1877, Jim Crow laws and sharecropping replaced legal slavery for many. In the decades after former slave owners and their advocates pushed for compensation, Collie House and others formed the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty and Pension Association in the 1890s. They lobbied Congress for pensions modeled on those given to Union soldiers. Bills were introduced, but none passed. No large-scale federal reparation program for descendants of the enslaved was ever enacted. In 2009, Congress passed a resolution apologizing for slavery and Jim Crow, but it explicitly stated it could not be used as the basis for any claims. Now for the context on reparations as a concept. The U.S. has paid reparations or compensation in other cases in 1988. Japanese Americans, in turn, during WW II, received $20,000 each, plus an apology. The federal government has settled claims with some Native American tribes for treaty violations in land. Other countries have done similar things for specific historical wrongs. Wow, some of this stuff that I didn't even know myself. This information again is from the script that I am reading, which is based on facts that Grok has given me, and Grok always provides sources. Okay, so this is all according to what Grok has given me. But even in the 1988 thing, by then, WW2 veterans, Japanese veterans, were obviously still alive. So, yeah, now there's no slaves still alive. And looky there. And it looked like even Native Americans, according to this, had some reparations also. According to this, it says that the federal government has settled claims with some Native American tribes for treaty violations in land. Other countries have done similar things with specific wrongs, historical wrongs. So, there's obviously some differences here, because those Japanese Americans were still alive. So yeah. And maybe those tribes were still affected by the land that was stolen, even if it was generations prior to that. Whereas black people today, they have more opportunities today than their ancestors, okay? So that's one of the differences. Okay? Now, let's get back to this script, shall we? But slavery reparations are uniquely difficult for several reasons, for several historical and practical reasons. And I just talked about this one, by the way, that even the script mentioned. The direct victims and perpetrators are long dead. Millions of current Americans are descendants of post-1865 immigrants who had no connection to U.S. slavery. Many white Americans, at the same time, were poor. Non-slaveholding were fought for the Union. Slavery was a global institution for millennia. Ancient Egypt, Rome, and the Arab world, West Africa, and others all practiced it extensively. Today, proposals like H.R. 40, a commission to study reparations, have been introduced for decades, but haven't become law at the federal level. Some cities, universities, and states like California's task force have explored local or targeted approaches, often broadening the discussion beyond 1865 to include Jim Crow, redlining, and ongoing disparities. Well, it seems like even in those scenarios, wouldn't those victims also be long since dead? If not extremely elderly? Oh my god, I'll have to double check when that was. Anyways, supporters argue intergenerational wealth gaps trace back to slavery and discrimination. Critics point to legal barriers, the challenge of fairly identifying who pays and who receives after 160 plus years. Progress made by black Americans since emancipation and the success of other immigrant groups who faced discrimination without reparations. So what's the takeaway? The claim that whites owe reparations to blacks for slavery flattens a complex, brutal history. Slavery was a monstrous evil. The U.S. version was part of a larger transatlantic system with deep African and European complicity. Emancipation, I finally said it right, came at enormous cost, with some attempts at redress. I can't talk today, like I said. With some attempts at redress? Am I saying that right? That were reversed or limited. No broad cash reparation programs has ever been implemented federally. Understanding these facts doesn't erase the legacy of slavery or later injustices. It does mean we should approach solutions with precision, evidence, and an eye toward policies that help all Americans facing poverty, family breakdown, and poor education outcomes regardless of ancestry. Truth matters more than slogans. So yeah, that's almost the end of my script. There's an outro too, which I'm not going to read. And I'm going to have Grok give me sources and stuff to put in the description. So, yeah. But the bottom line, though, is that slavery was over 160 years ago, and those people were wrong, and it looks like there was an attempt to give them some form of reparation, but then the reparations that they were given was taken away. And that's unfortunate, but now the original slaves are long since dead. The original slave owners are long since dead. The people involved are long since dead. And today, black people have a bigger opportunity for success than their ancestors did during slavery. I mean, my goodness, we even had a black president for 2 terms. Regardless of what you think of him. I mean, I'm not a fan of him. I'm not a fan of Obama, but we had Obama for 2 terms. And, like I said, black people, they have an equal amount of success as anybody else nowadays. Okay? Nowadays, like, the racism that black people face today does not affect their success. Okay? Okay, so, think about it. What's February? Black History Month. Okay? What's Black History Month? Black History Month is used to recognize black people that made great achievements, that had great accomplishments. Okay? So, that's the point of Black History Month in February. Okay? And all that stuff. So, yeah. So the truth is, despite all the injustice, the people responsible are long since dead. The people who were wronged are long since dead. And it's too late to say anything about that now. Over 160 years later, so yeah, so that's why I am against reparations, okay? And there's even black people that don't believe in reparations either, because they was never a slave, and no white person alive was owned slaves. That's what this is about, okay? So if you never owned a slave, and then you don't owe black people anything, okay? And like I said, black people have just as much opportunity for success as anybody else here, okay? So, yeah, that is it for this video. Bye.